Good evening and welcome to this special edition of IBA News covering the first day of the visit of U.S. President Barack Obama. I'm Leah Zinder. At this hour, U.S. President Barack Obama is at the Prime Minister's residence in Jerusalem, where he's the guest of honor at a gala dinner hosted by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his wife Sarah. Upon his arrival at the residence, Obama was greeted by the Netanyahu family, including their older son, Yair. Obama then signed the guest book, and behind closed doors, the two settled down for a serious talk. And joining me in the studio for the duration of the broadcast, I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Einat Wilf, former Knesset member for the Independence Party and former member of the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee and a former foreign policy advisor to Shimon Peres. Thank you very much for being here, Einat.
Thank you.
Well, so far, no one's put a foot wrong, and the Obama visit couldn't have gone better, except for the very end, which we'll get to at the press conference. So far, you'd say successful visit?
Absolutely. It looks very successful. Looks like both sides are getting what they want out of this visit. So, yes, I think it's also been very well prepared.
Right.
And the expectations have been clearly set. So in that respect, I think we're all seeing a good visit and one that serves truly the alliance between the countries and the interests of each one.
Okay. Well, that's the way the day went, possibly until the last half hour. A short time ago, President Obama and Prime Minister Netanyahu interrupted their talks and walked out to the courtyard of the Prime Minister's residence to meet the press. Some of the 500 journalists who've come from abroad to cover the presidential visit and their Israeli counterparts. In attendance was the newly appointed U.S. Secretary of State, John Kerry, who arrived with the president's entourage. Here are some of the highlights of what the two leaders had to say.
Mr. President, you have made it clear that you are determined to prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons. I appreciate your forthright position on this point. I also appreciate that you have noted that you have acted to thwart this threat, both through determined diplomacy and strong sanctions that are getting stronger yet. Notwithstanding our joint efforts and your great success in mobilizing the international community, diplomacy and sanctions so far have not stopped Iran's nuclear program. And as you know, my view is that in order to stop Iran's nuclear programs peacefully, diplomacy and sanctions must be augmented by a clear and credible threat of military action. In this regard, Mr. President, I want to thank you once again for always making clear that Israel must be able to defend itself by itself against any threat. I deeply appreciate those words because they speak to the great transformation that has occurred in the life of the Jewish people with the rebirth of the Jewish state. The Jewish people, only 2 generations ago, were once a powerless people, defenseless against those who sought our destruction. Today, we have both the right and the capability to defend ourselves. As you said earlier today, the essence of the state of Israel, the essence of the rebirth of the Jewish state, is the fulfillment of the age-old dream of the Jewish people to be masters of our fate in our own state. I think that was a wonderful line that I will cherish because it really gets down to the essence of what this state is about. That is why I know that you appreciate that Israel can never cede the right to defend ourselves to others, even to the greatest of our friends. And Israel has no better friend than the United States of America.
We continued our close consultation on Iran. We agree that a nuclear-armed Iran would be a threat to the region, a threat to the world, and potentially an existential threat to Israel. And we agree on our goal. We do not have a policy of containment when it comes to a nuclear Iran. Our policy is to prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon. We prefer to resolve this diplomatically, and there's still time to do so. Iran's leaders must understand, however, that they have to meet their international obligations. And meanwhile, the international community will continue to increase the pressure on the Iranian government. The United States will continue to consult closely with Israel on next steps, and I will repeat, all options are on the table We will do what is necessary to prevent Iran from getting the world's worst weapons.
I know there have been questions regarding what the policy of the new government will be towards peace with the Palestinians. So let me be clear. Israel remains fully committed to peace and to the solution of two states for two peoples. We extend our hands in peace and in friendship to the Palestinian people. I hope that your visit, along with the visit of Secretary of State Kerry, will help us turn a page in our relations with the Palestinians. Let us sit down at the negotiating table. Let us put aside all preconditions. Let us work together to achieve the historic compromise that will end our conflict once and for all.
That a central element of a lasting peace must be a strong and secure Jewish state where Israel's security concerns are met, alongside a sovereign and independent Palestinian state. In this regard, I'd note that last year was a milestone, the first year in 4 decades when not a single Israeli citizen lost their life because of terrorism emanating from the West Bank. It's a reminder that Israel has a profound interest in a strong and effective Palestinian Authority. And as the Prime Minister's new government begins its work, we'll continue to look for steps that both Israelis and Palestinians can take to build trust and confidence upon which lasting peace will depend.
Dr. Wilf, would you agree that there is substantive tension, disagreement between the United States and Israel on the Iranian issue? Prime Minister Netanyahu made it clear we will not, dare not, depend even on the best of our friends for our own defense.
But there's nothing new in that. Any effort to present it as tension or problem, I think, is misguided, because by definition, Israel and the United States are always going to look at threats differently by virtue of geography, by virtue of size. And Israel, every prime minister, whether it was a Labour prime minister or a Likud prime minister, always reiterated to all American presidents, Democrats and Republicans, that Israel will defend itself by itself. So in that respect, the Israeli prime minister is reiterating an age-old and in many ways a basic Israeli position. The American president has also made his position clear. There are structural differences that we can never gloss over that have to do with just the different geographies, the sizes, the nature of the threat. But I think in that respect, this was very smart to be very open about it, to be very clear. I think the Israeli prime minister, sometimes people miss that. He said a very important word. He said in order to peacefully prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons, you have to have a credible military threat. Many people perceive his talk about using military means as being very hawkish and warmongering, whereas his view is in a way the ancient Hebrew prophet view, that if you want peace, you need to prepare for war. If you want to peacefully resolve an issue, you need to project strength, you need to have a credible military option, which means to also prepare it, as well as to be willing to exercise it, and then you have the hope of not using it. And I think the American president was also very important. It was very important on his side that he reiterated again that the military option is on the table.
Right, and that containment was not an issue for the United States. Nevertheless, the president did admit that there are differences between the two sides. Some believe one of the purposes of his visit was to try to bridge those differences, but clearly that did not happen.
There are structural differences. There will never be any ability to bridge those structural differences.
Right. Okay.
Because of the size, because of the geopolitics, because of the nature of the threats. What they can agree on, and I think this is something they will certainly either have agreed on or will agree on, is not to surprise each other, to coordinate,
right,
to make sure that it is done in the spirit of alliance and friendship, with the understanding that what Israel sees, and the American president said it, as an existential threat, is not an existential threat to the United States. Therefore, there will always be structural differences. which is why it's important to reiterate that Israel has the right to defend itself by itself.
Okay, and very quickly on the Palestinian issue, the Prime Minister reiterated his commitment to a two-state solution.
Certainly.
And President Obama addressed it as well, but it's interesting to see the difference between Obama 4 years ago and Obama of today. 4 years ago, he was, there was an urgency in his rhetoric about solving the issue and his very brutal pressure on Israel. Very, very different tone today.
Very different. I think in many ways reality has hit home. The Middle East has shown that certainly the Israeli-Palestinian issue, I would even go so far to say, is a marginal issue in the Middle East. I think he understands that today the challenges are very different. And he also made a very interesting comment about the limits of power and the importance of timing in this conflict.
Right, absolutely. Well, perhaps the shot that best sums up the spirit of U.S. President Obama's first day in Israel is this: the two leaders relaxed in their shirt sleeves, exchanging casual, friendly comments. From the airport, Obama took off for an intensive day of meetings and top-level talks. IBA's Eli Wargelunter wraps up the first day of the American president's visit to the Holy Land.
President Barack Obama stepped out of Air Force One at 12:30 this afternoon to start his first overseas visit since taking office for his second term. Among the people waiting on the tarmac to greet him were President Shimon Peres and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. After inspecting an IDF honor guard, Obama was led along the red carpet to a long line of officials. There he greeted the entire new government, scores of senior Israeli officials and members of the security establishment, as well as leaders of all the religious and national denominations that form Israeli society. The U.S. president walked down the line and graciously shook hands and said a few words to each and every one. It was clear that both sides were keen to demonstrate the friendship that they felt. The closeness was also emphasized in the welcoming speeches.
On behalf of the government and the people of Israel, I come here today with a simple message for you and the American people. Thank you. Thank you for standing by Israel at this time of historic change in the Middle East. Thank you for unequivocally affirming Israel's sovereign right to defend itself by itself against any threat.
Shalom. President Peres, Prime Minister Netanyahu, and most of all, to the people of Israel, thank you for this incredibly warm welcome. This is my third visit to Israel. So let me just say, Tov lehiyot shuv b'haaretz. I'm so honored to be here as you prepare to celebrate the 65th anniversary of a free and independent state of Israel. Yet I know that in stepping foot on this land, I walk with you on the historic homeland of the Jewish people.
Obama was then led to the Iron Dome battery at the airport. Also on display at the site were components of the long-range Arrow 2 and 3 and the mid-range Magic Wand anti-missile systems. The U.S. president then made his way to the site where the presidential helicopter Marine One was parked. En route, he removed his jacket, a casual gesture, which was immediately followed by Netanyahu doing the same, clearly symbolizing a camaraderie that the two men were hoping to develop. An impressive display of 12 U.S. Army helicopters then took off towards the Capitol with President Barack Obama on board. After a short rest, Obama headed to the president's residence, where he was welcomed by President Shimon Peres. The two presidents walked together down the red carpet, and when they entered the main hall in the residence, they were serenaded by dozens of children waving U.S. and Israeli flags and singing Hevenu Shalom Aleichem. Obama shook hands with the kids and then posed for photos with them and Peres. Obama proceeded to sign the presidential guest book, writing at length as Peres looked over his shoulder like a proud teacher. Obama was then serenaded again by three children singing the song Tomorrow from the famous Broadway show Annie, sung in English, Hebrew, and Arabic. Obama was clearly delighted by the show, smiling broadly throughout. He then left with Peres, walking out to the presidential garden, where Obama planted a tree with some assistance from Peres. The two men then headed back inside and to a private room for two diplomatic meetings, first with their senior staff, including U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry and Obama's National Security Advisor Tom Donilon. Afterward, Obama and Peres each made a brief statement.
We live in an age that is both global and domestic, inseparably. Interest may divide people. Vision may unite them. There is a common vision uniting us to confront the dangers, to bring peace closer as soon as possible. The greatest danger is a nuclear Iran. So you said, so you do. We trust your policy, which calls to first by non-military means, with a clear statement that both other options remain on the table. You have made it clear that your intention is not to contain, but to prevent.
I reaffirmed to President Peres, as I will throughout my visit, that in this work, the State of Israel will have no greater friend than the United States. And the work we do in our time will make it more likely that the children that we saw today, alongside children from throughout the region, have the opportunity for security and peace and prosperity. You know, this obligation to future generations, I think, was well symbolized by the tree planting that we started our meeting with.
After meeting with Peres, Obama moved on to the Prime Minister's residence for photos with Benjamin and Sarah Netanyahu and signing another guest book. And tomorrow is another full day of ceremonies and meetings. Ellie Wogelanter, IBA News.
Einat, President Obama has so many urgent problems to deal with at home, the economy. We all know what they are. Our government was just sworn in 2 days ago. Why is it so urgent for him to come here now?
I would argue that it's related. In many ways, he needs calm abroad in order to focus on, as they define it, nation building at home. And if you look at this tour, it's a tour where he's visiting allies. He's visiting the stable countries. He's visiting Israel, he's visiting Jordan, Turkey, Saudi Arabia. He's actually wanting to make sure that the allies are secure, that they're strengthened, and that they will not surprise him. And I think he needs to have calm abroad in order to be able to focus on the many challenges at home. And I think in many ways this is the purpose of the trip. Not any big changes, not any bold changes, but let's just take stock of our allies, make sure that all is well so that we can go home and focus on our domestic issues.
Right, and it's a complete turnaround, of course, as far as Prime Minister Netanyahu is concerned, because Obama has never hidden his dislike or suspicion about Netanyahu. But now that appears to have changed.
I personally never made a big issue of any personal issues, but I think generally the American president, I think, has come to appreciate and respect the prudent leadership of Prime Minister Netanyahu, that given everything that has happened in the Middle East, he was very careful, very prudent, not to let any conflagration open up. Really, you have sometimes very hawkish rhetoric from the side of Netanyahu, but if you look at his actions, they're very prudent, very careful, very moderate. And I think President Obama has actually come to notice that and appreciate that. And right now, that's what he needs.
Right. For decades in the United States, this would be a good move for him to make as well.
Certainly. And he's been, in a way, I could say, badgered or told that it's not okay that he has not visited Israel, so he corrected that. He corrected, in a way, the mistake he made in his Cairo speech, which I called Zionism denial, which was denying the history of Zionism, the connection between the Jewish people and the land of Israel, and just focusing on the Holocaust. He today corrected it in a big way, mentioning the broad span of history. That was a very important issue. So in many ways, that's also part of cleaning the table. And then he can go back and have a domestic agenda.
Well, speaking of foreign policy issues, one of the main issues on the table during the Obama-Netanyahu discussions was Syria. And this is what President Obama said after an Israeli reporter asked him a short time ago why the United States has stood by and done nothing as 70,000 Syrians have been slaughtered by their president.
If your suggestion is that I have not acted unilaterally, militarily inside of Syria, the response has been, or my response would be, that to the extent possible, I want to make sure that we're working as an international community to deal with this problem, because I think it's a world problem, not simply a United States problem, or an Israel problem, or a Turkish problem. It's a world problem when tens of thousands of people are being slaughtered, including innocent women and children. And so we will continue to work in an international framework to try to bring about the kind of change that's necessary in Syria. Secretary Kerry has been working nonstop since he came into his current position to try to help mobilize and organize our overall efforts. And we will continue to push every lever that we have to try to bring about a resolution inside of Syria that respects the rights and the safety and security of all people, regardless of whatever sectarian lines currently divide Syria. Last point I'll make, which is probably obvious, is this is not easy. When you start seeing a civil war that has sectarian elements to it, and you've got a repressive government that is intent on maintaining power, and you have mistrust that is broken out along sectarian lines, and you have an opposition that has not had the opportunity or time to organize itself, both politically as well as militarily, then you end up seeing some of the devastation that you've been seeing. And we're going to do everything we can to continue to prevent it, and I know that the vast majority of our international partners feel the same way.
First of all, clearly President Obama was stung by the question, by the allegation that America is standing by and doing nothing. Do you think that, in fact, the United States will do something about Syria, and especially about the danger that chemical weapons may fall into the hands of Hezbollah or al-Qaeda terrorists?
So on the broader issue, the president himself has in a way admitted, and it's a remarkable admission, there are limits to American power. It's not clear what America can do to make the situation in Syria better. It's clearly terrible. It's clearly devastating, but it's not clear what can be done to make it better, what America can do to make it better. And he's by now an experienced and smart president who knows that you don't do things just for show. You don't intervene just to feel good about intervening. You need to intervene if you think it can improve the situation. And he's essentially admitting that right now, it's not clear that this can bring it about. The issue of weapons is more limited, and I think that there will be an effort to ensure that the chemical weapons are either secured or do not get into the wrong hands. That's a separate issue.
Right. Well, there were many people in Israel who were concerned about the re-election of Obama for a second term, predicting that it would further strain what they called an already tense U.S.-Israeli relationship. Let's listen to what former Foreign Minister and newly sworn-in Minister of Energy and Water, SILVAN SHALOM, had to say earlier today on that subject.
So many, they told us that if President Obama will get re-elected, it will be a catastrophe in the relations between Israel and the United States. And 2 days after the sworn, the president is here, and he shows once again his friendship toward Israel.
Okay, well, that's on the Israel-American relation, and I imagine that you agree with what Minister Shalom had to say on that subject. Right,
absolutely. Right. I mean, at the end of the day, all the doomsayers were proved wrong. And of course, there was a lot of wishful thinking and politicking in all those predictions.
Right. Okay. And you believe that even if there are disagreements as we go forward, that in fact that Israel and the United States will be able to to move on and work together in a cordial relationship.
Absolutely. And the last 4 years, we should know, have been excellent years for the relationship. Anyone in the In Circle will tell you the security, intelligence cooperation has been the broadest, the widest in the history of the two nations. Very strong cooperation. I think in many ways this visit is more just about showing that this is the case rather than having a few people in the In Circle knowing that. But I think we should expect the relationship to become even deeper, even stronger, and maybe this time people will also acknowledge it and see it rather than it being, in a way, a secret of a few people in the know.
Well, that's an optimistic note on which to end. And just before closing, a brief reminder of what's planned for tomorrow, the second day of the Obama visit. The American president will start the day with a tour of the Israel Museum, focusing on the Dead Sea Scrolls housed in the Shrine of the Book. Obama then leaves for Ramallah for meetings there and will return to Jerusalem in time for the much-anticipated address to 1,000 Israeli students at the International Convention Center in Jerusalem. The evening will begin with a reception at the U.S. consulate in the capital, followed by dinner at the residence of President Shimon Peres. And that brings to an end the special IBA coverage of the first day of the visit of U.S. President Barack Obama. Thanks to our guest, Dr. Einat Wilf, for being here. Tomorrow, IBA News will be on at a special broadcast time of 4 p.m. due to continuing coverage of the Obama visit, and again at 9:30 tomorrow evening to sum up the second day of the visit. Thank you all for watching IBA News. I'm Leah Zinder. Shalom from Jerusalem.